Hi, I'm Jonathan J from dealmakers.co.uk. I'd like you to meet one of my amazing mastermind clients who bought over 17 businesses and then sold them for an 8-figure sum. On this video, you'll find out exactly how we did it.
So initial consideration was 11.5. There's got just under $1 million of excess working capital to add on to that. And then we've got about an extra 3.6 upside on the earnout. So very quickly we went from not selling to, fuck it, let's just go.
So I'd like to introduce you to someone who was on Mastermind in 2019 and has quite an incredible story to tell. And we're going to make this as interactive as possible because I want you to ask the questions. I want you to understand how a buy and build, where you buy multiple businesses, you put them together, and then ultimately you sell them on to someone else, works, because this man has done that in the last 4 years. He's bought, he's built, and he's sold. So please put your hands together for David. Hi, David. Hello.
Hiya.
Hi. You may sit or you can stand. It's entirely up to you. So, David, thank you for joining us. So, prior to starting this whole buy and build strategy, you and your wife had a business doing the same sort of thing, didn't you?
So, but just by way of background, I was in the domiciliary care sector, which is visiting field forces carers, going and looking after old people in their own home, so not owning the physical care home. I was working in big corporate in London and got sick of that life, commuting up and down from Winchester. So we set up a small little domiciliary care agency with all the regulatory checks in our spare bedroom about 14 years ago. And for the first 10 years, I was that typical small business owner, where I was doing everything, growing the business slowly through organic growth. We ended up to 2 branches, one in Southampton, one up in towards Basingstoke, and doing about £2 million of turnover. It was a great little business. We had maybe 120 staff, something like that. But it was, as you say, sort of just covering its costs, small profit. And it was good, you know, paid for the holidays, but it wasn't the growth that I perhaps wanted.
So over that 10-year period, you went from 0 to 2 million of revenue.
Yep.
You and your wife managing, probably wearing several hats.
Until she chose to leave. Is a nice way to put it. It got to the stage where it was easier for one person to be making decisions. So I was the IT guy, I was the HR guy.
Absolutely.
You know, I was doing a lot of different things.
Yeah, so you dealt with the problems, you opened the post, you signed for the deliveries, you did the finances, you paid people.
Yeah, I had a finance assistant, but I was doing a lot of the stuff. And that was fine, but it wasn't giving me what I was after. And then in September 2018, I had a mate who was running a similar care company up in Gloucestershire, and he was going to close the business down. And just over a cup of coffee and a number of meetings, we sort of came up with an intuitive deal to save his staff jobs, save his clients, and I would take over the business. I didn't have any cash to pay him on day one, so we just instinctively worked out a payment plan over a couple of years. And that deal went through at the end of September 2018. It grew my business by about 40% in one day, which was great. He was about 800,000 of turnover. We were 2 million. But I was driving up and down the motorway, doing the integration, doing the HR, the systems, all that sort of stuff. And it went well. And that was a bit of a light bulb moment that you don't have to grow. Because the prior year, I'd spent about £150,000 trying to open a new branch organically in Surrey. And hired a manager, rented an office, started recruiting staff, and after about 7 or 8 months, it wasn't working out to close it down, and that was just money gone.
Yes. So a lot of work.
Yeah.
Money that you won't see again.
Yeah.
And you're no further forward than you were in the first place.
And you know, the amount I ended up paying him was less than that, and it instantly worked in one day, adding 40% to the revenue and the bottom line.
So your eyes were open to what is possible with an acquisition.
And fortuitously, a few months after that, one of the larger corporates in our sector went into administration just before Christmas 2018. And the local authority phoned us up. And it was in the area that we'd just done this acquisition up in Gloucestershire. Phoned us up and said, Allied healthcare is going into administration. We need to provide care for the clients, particularly over the Christmas period. Would you like to cheaply transfer their staff and have the contract for free? And I said, yep, we can do that. And it was, we worked all the hours over the Christmas New Year period personally. I was out delivering care, but we made it work, and we ended up with an extra 60 staff and added it to the revenue. And then in about March 2019, a neighbouring council also had a contract hand back. We got their contract for free as well. So in the space of about five months, I'd done 1 paid and 2 free acquisitions. And
all just landing in your lap, really.
It was very lucky, but it was also right place, right time, and being able to say yes and doing the hard work to make the integration work. And I was doing millions of miles up and down that motorway, and I discovered your podcast. So I thought maybe we need to get some education around this. So I came and did Mastermind in 2019. But it was successful, and it really was a revelation that you can make these acquisitions work if you develop a good system for the integration, the branding, the HR transition, making sure people feel comfortable on that transition. So it wasn't an easy process, but it certainly was worth the effort. But by then coming and doing the Mastermind course with you, and the interactions I had with a lot of people on that course, it was a great education. Not just the technical content of the Mastermind, but the learning you get from other people out doing deals.
Well, I mean, this is what I say to people, that it's what you learn from me and from other people standing at the front. But it's about that community and that support.
And it also elevates your aspiration as well. You start realising that the buy and build strategy is not it's not just growth for growth's sake, that there is an end goal to that. So I went on a frenzy and did about 17 acquisitions in the next couple of years. And that was from very small distressed, pay it for £1. They're about to be closed down by HMRC. Take the staff, take the contracts and make it work, particularly where you can bolt it into an existing location. And you've got a local management presence that can help with that transition, through to several £1 million for a 4-site operation. So over that period, we ended up with 12 branches, and grew from about my original 2 million to nearing 20 million in turnover. One of the things I did along that journey was realise that I was perhaps the limiting factor operationally. I'm not the best person to be running that business. So, and again, a lot of this came out of discussions with the Mastermind group, is that invest in a management team that you can't afford yet and is scaling for that future growth. So at the point that I brought in a great finance director, and she took a lot of that, both on the operational delivery but also helping me with the M&A aspects. But then when I brought a chief exec in, I could step back and only focus on strategy and deal making, and to a lesser extent talking with lenders, potential lenders at that stage, whereas I let him run the organisation.
Now let's talk about that for a moment, because I think many entrepreneurs aren't operationally minded. We have the vision, we have founder's vision as it's called, but we don't really have the attention to detail to want to get into that detail, and the detail is where it's at when you're building a substantial business. So you went out and you found someone. How did you find that person?
Talking with people mainly.
Okay.
So it wasn't like a job ad on Indeed. It was, talking to my bank, talking to my accountant, talking to friends that work in various industries, and got a lot of personal recommendations. I mean, one of the most difficult jobs as we went on that journey was, some people are great for this size organisation, that they're not ready for the next size up, and firing people is probably the hardest job to do as an entrepreneur, particularly when you're a startup and you've invested in these people, but at some point they reach a capability ceiling. And then I realised that I was that person that needed to be fired. So good, I still had the ownership, but stepping myself out of that overall leadership role was transformative. This guy came from outside the sector. He came from the gym sector, so large multi-site management, managing 140 gym sites, had done a couple of private equity exits and roll-ups. He came with skill set of the systems for managing multi-site much more deeply.
And a business that was bigger than the business that you had. Yeah. So the business could grow into him.
Correct.
He wasn't going to be left behind.
Yeah, and I gave him shadow equity of about 10%. It wasn't real equity, but it was a handshake deal.
You're watching this because you're interested in buying a business. So get my business buying toolkit free of charge. 17 downloads, videos, reports, and my books as well, completely free of charge. The link is right below.
Along that way, my next door neighbour had early days invested £100,000 and got 15%. So he's now had a very good return on his early investment. But that meant my wife and I still owned 85% of the business.
So that's interesting. So in the early days, when you need money, you're likely to give up more equity than you would later on when you don't need it so much, or maybe.
But that first 10 years was the classic small business journey of how do I make payroll tomorrow?
Yeah.
You know, it really was. Who can I borrow some money from to cover this month's rent bill? You know, the banks are breathing down the neck, and all that stress. Startup founders.
Yeah. and it's the small amounts of money that can be really damaging.
Yeah.
You think there's going to be large amounts that put the business under pressure, but sometimes you're short by 10, 15, 20, 25,000 pounds, and if you haven't got it, you haven't got it.
Yeah, and not paying, it's a service-based business, and not paying your staff, your business stops. They walk out.
No one turns up on Monday morning and it's game over. Yeah,
so we're good to get past those early days. But 10 years of grind, and maybe everybody has to do it for their experience, but I would never go back to doing a startup again. So we brought in a really high quality manager, continued with the acquisitions journey, and we were doing some really good distressed turnarounds because I had such a good management team, systems, processes, and ways of integrating very quickly these acquisitions.
And I think that's an important point, because I veer people off the path of buying distressed businesses because you might not pay in money, but you pay in time, stress, sleepless nights, and probably have to put money into it at some point. But if you've already got the infrastructure, then that is the way to do it, because you can just take the contracts and pop it into what you've already got.
Yeah.
You don't have to go out and hire people or figure things out. It's already figured out.
Yeah, for your first couple of acquisitions, definitely hire buy healthy businesses, but it was opportunistic. So, as I said, some of them were distressed, some of them were healthy. One of the acquisitions we made was up in Oldham. We're based down in the south, basically, and then latterly in the west, Gloucestershire, South Gloucestershire, North Somerset. But I had the opportunity of a distressed business about to be closed down by HMRC for not paying their taxes. The owners were basically fleeing the country. They weren't from originally from England, and again I bought that for £1. It was losing 20k a month, and with my changes we made very quickly, the management team that flew in and made the changes, we turned that to roughly £25,000 a month of contribution into the group.
And this was a management team that you had already?
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have worked if you'd bought it and then said, okay, right, now we need to figure out what to do. You already had the plan.
Correct.
And the people.
But it was a long way away. So Oldham is, a long way up near Manchester from Winchester. And so I thought, being on the Mastermind group, you don't necessarily have to own businesses forever. Why don't I try and just get rid of that one branch and just take the profit on what we've done to improve that? So I phoned up a large acquisitive corporate in our sector who I knew was interested, but when I said to them, do you want to buy this branch? They said, we're too big for that now. One branch doesn't move the needle for us. So, not interested, but we'd buy all of you if you want. I went, no, because we were hitting 20 million with the two acquisitions that I had in the pipeline of turnover. But we had plans, and I'd invested in the management team and so on, to go to 50. And that was the plan, is then we'd start looking at an exit at 50 million of turnover. In fact, we'd just gone and got a £3.5 million debt facility from Boost.
Yes.
Used it to clean up the deferred consideration table, some working capital, but also as a war chest to go and do more acquisitions. But then I sat with my wife and said, the offer's good, why don't we take it? So very quickly we went from not selling to, fuck it, let's just go. And
it's amazing how a good offer can change things.
That deal, their chief exec is doing a lot of deals. They were venture capital funded out of New York. They were a new entrant. They'd only started 4 years previously, so we'd wasted the first 10 years, and they'd grown to hundreds of millions of turnover through acquisition in that same last 4 years. He wanted to get the deal done in 6 weeks. We actually got it done in 10. And I was doing 2 buy-side deals to roll into that at the same time as I was doing the sell-side deal. So
and then you can apply the exit multiple to the ones that you just bought.
So the acquisitions we're doing, besides the £1 deals which were distressed, most of the healthy targets, they're small, they're a retiring couple, they're only one location, the profit margin is not as good as ours was. We would offer between 2.5 and 3.5 EBITDA on those, and we eventually sold for 5.5. But in addition to the multiple arbitrage, you get the scale efficiencies. I think on the most recent podcast, the snippet that you've included talks about on the Isle of Wight, we had 3 small acquisitions that individually were about 600,000 of turnover, but by getting all 3 of them to agree a sale at the same time, doing the deal, and then smashing them together. And yes, we had to make people redundant, but we went from 3 physical offices to 1. You know, we had our brand, we had a lot of track record and influence, and that size and our experience allowed us to then win a 10-year, £30 million contract with the local authority, which none of those 3 individuals
would have been able to do. But at the scale that you were at, putting the 3 together, you could achieve it.
So we were getting, you know, the money for us was in the multiple arbitrage, but also the cost savings by applying our people, processes and systems and bringing things together. And that's been consistent across most of the acquisitions we did, that we could look at the financials of the target and already identify what our operating model would yield rather than what their books say, with some simple changes and centralisation of finance, payroll, accounting, HR, IT. Those central functions definitely save money that individual targets don't have access to those savings. So that was end of September 2022. We eventually signed a piece of paper, and I had to then run that business until the end of 2023. So 15-month earn-out.
Which is a reasonable amount of time, isn't it? For the amount of money we're talking about, doing 15 months.
And the acquirer was doing a lot of these size acquisitions, both here and internationally, so they didn't have the manpower to take over the business. They wanted an off-ramp for me to run it, so they didn't have to think about it straight away while they do their integration program over a much slower time frame. So, I mean, the relationship was very good with that acquirer, and I enjoyed working with them a lot. They are really trying to invest in technology infrastructure and transformation, so that I can see their vision. I agree with it for the sector. Well, I won't go into a lot of detail, but there was a large chunk of the consideration tied up in that earn-out with some performance metrics against it, which we massively smashed. And they're on the hook, from my point of view, by about an extra 3.7 million than they thought they were. They're refusing to pay, and we're having to go through lawyers to get that. But, you know, we'll sort that out. It's just going to take a little bit longer to get my...
And just give us an indication of the entire deal value if they pay you what they are meant to pay you.
So initial consideration was 11.5. There's about just under $1 million of excess working capital to add on to that. And then we've got about an extra 3.6 upside on the earn-out, if the court agrees with me.
Sure.
But we'll get there. The lesson I've learned from that is the more you, contrary to what we would like to do as a buyer, as a seller, try and keep as much out of the deferred and the earn-out as you can, because you can't ever bank on it. You have to bank on what you put in the bank on day one. Everything else is to the good. But, you know, I kept 2 branches, the original 2 branches I had, and by that stage, those 2 branches are about 3 million of turnover. So I sold about 17 to the big acquirer, kept 3 million, 2 branches, some of my management team, and we were going to go again, thinking that we could do exactly what I've been doing for the last 4 years, but do it faster this time, having learned the lessons. And had written the share purchase agreement so that I kept the brand name, I kept the intellectual property, and from their side it was a win-win, because potentially I could do it again and they'd buy us again.
Absolutely.
We're doing in a multi-tiered industry, the big corporates haven't got time for the little down in the weeds roll-up of mum and pop businesses. I would do that for them, and they would come and... Turns out that with the earn-out dispute, I sort of started falling out with them. But an Israeli company that wanted to enter the sector has just come in and made an offer on the bit that I kept. So as of end of March this year, I'm unemployed. I have no interest in the sector, and I'm looking for new fields because of the non-competes. I need to go and do something in a different sector. But it's been an interesting journey, and if only I'd known 14 years ago what I knew in the final 4 years, I would have had a very different life. But it's been fun. I'm definitely too young to retire.
Yes.
And just looking for what that next platform vehicle is going to be and what sector it is. So.
Well, great story.
Yeah.
Let's give David some applause. That's fantastic.
Are you a business owner and you want to grow via acquisition? Then you need to be part of my Mastermind program, where we hold your hand all the way through the entire process to make sure that your first acquisition is a resounding success. I put some information in the video description below.
So I want you to start thinking of questions that you'd like to ask. Let me kick off with a couple. So the hardest part of integrating businesses is the people element, is that cultural part.
Yeah.
How did you deal with that, or rather, how did your team deal with that?
Okay. Key thing is be present, be on site on day one of the acquisition is announced to the staff, and they want to look in the owner's eyes, not just a manager or somebody that's coming with the acquisition. They want to know that is their job safe, what changes are happening, and they've got basic questions. Is what colour's the uniform?
Yeah.
They just want somebody to answer all those questions. And the honest answer is there will be some changes, but at the carer level, we value every single one of you and want you to keep your jobs. And as long as they hear that as message number one, that's half the battle. The other things like systems changes and expecting them to do more on their phones than a lot of these agencies that we require were still quill and ink. We're coming in with an app that has all the carers' rosters on them and medical notes on the phone and things like that. So there will be some changes, and some people would move with the times and others didn't like change because it was change. And if we could keep 10%, only lose 10% of the staff through an acquisition, that's what we kind of budgeted on in our numbers. But having a really strong chief exec who could sell the vision and the operational impact both at the local manager level and also at the carer level was key. And then I brought in a really top-tier HR director as well, who can deal with all of the... there's HR directors and there's HR directors. There's the soft, fluffy type, which is important if you're doing counselling, but there's also one which is, I'm here to represent the interests of the business from a staffing perspective.
Yes.
And she wouldn't take shit off anybody. She was lovely and kind, but when the hard decisions need to be made, she was the one that would go and do those. So again, it's just about investing in your senior management.
And how many staff?
At the end, about 1,000. We've always said that, it's a business, but it's also originally the family ethos of how we started it.
Yes.
We do look after people, and often we would wait too long to fire people, but we were seen to be fair, and that culture of promoting and being fair did permeate throughout the organisation, even after I sort of stepped back from running the business.
And don't you think, though, that stepping back is not only the right thing to do, it's absolutely necessary if you're going to build a business of that size? Because if you're on the front line, you don't have the mental bandwidth to deal with everything that's happening.
As a founder, it is really hard, though.
Yeah.
So Peter, in his first year, had big corporate mindset still, and brought in his own management team that he's worked with before, and invested £100,000 of my money in a call centre that didn't work. You had to let him make his own mistakes as he was learning the sector, but within 12 months, he was sector specific, very knowledgeable, could talk with councils or local sellers as much as I could. He was very, very good, but it took time for me to let him make the mistakes. But that was part of investing in him, not just monetarily, but investing in his time and his education. We brought in an ops director from that first acquisition and promoted, brought in a finance director, brought in a chief exec, brought in the key people, a data and systems analyst. He was a good addition as well. So as you're bringing them in, you've got to keep releasing the strings.
And how was your day spent? Were you still going to head office?
I would have a once a week Monday morning with the whole management team.
Okay.
And we'd run once a month board meetings, and then Peter and I would talk on the phone more frequently than that. But as part of not being the guy that people would turn to, I wanted to physically put some space there. So, yeah.
And before we go to some questions,
what does life look like now? I mean, when we were chatting earlier, comparing holidays, you do a little bit of travelling, right?
I have for the last 6 months. So whilst I'm fighting the legal battles, it's very hard to clear my mind about what that next thing is, but I'm kind of there now that the kids have gone back to school. I've got a good life.
Where have you been recently?
So I've bought after the deal, I bought a ski chalet in France, which we use in winter, but also it's great for mountain biking in summer. So we've had a couple of weeks in there. I've been to Venice, I've been to Portugal, off to Morocco in October. I'm off to Australia next week. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of travel.
So life is good.
Life is good, even with some legal stuff.
Even with the stuff, yeah, absolutely. Great, let's do some questions. Oh, you can do some applause as well. Yeah. So, where should we start? Let me do this one, John. We'll start right over here. Just pass the mic over. Thank you very much. And there should be a...
So when you was going on your acquisition spree, was all the acquisitions share purchases or was some asset as well?
Some asset, particularly where, there was a couple where HMRC was going to close them down or the regulator was going to close them down. So yeah, often it was a cheapy transfer of the staff because they've got a contractual entitlement to move with the work and a contract novation with the local authorities. And then where you've got private clients, which is a B2C type contract, you have to go and speak to those individual families and agree to them. But as long as they're getting the continuity of care from the same carer, the fact that the brand name changed makes no difference. Yeah. You had to do things like promising no price uplift for the next 6 months or something just to get them across. But yeah, a lot of them were asset purchases where they were either distressed or had something wrong with them. But the more substantial ones were share purchase agreements.
Yeah, thank you.
And your share purchases take longer and cost more in terms of fees, but there are definite benefits because you're not a startup where an SPV acquiring assets, you've got a startup, you haven't got any credit history, you're starting all over again. Where with the share purchase, you've got the benefit of that trading history, that credit history, the relationships with the relationships don't change. It's a more seamless transition. Yes, just pass the mic to this front. Okay, so we'll go Trevor first. You got the mic first.
Thanks, David. In the service sector that you were in, how did you fund the acquisitions?
Again, this is the difficulty because there's no assets to leverage, and we could get where there's an existing debtor book and an invoice finance facility, and once we had that originally, we could roll it out to new acquisitions. We just told them the size of the debtor book and they would increase the facility and give some upfront cash. But that's fairly minimal. We had a 85% advance. Invoice finance is just like heroin. You want to get off it as quick as you can. It's expensive debt for what it is. So we had an invoice finance facility, which we then got rid of when we got the larger debt facility. But you're right, it is very hard. You can't do a no money down deal unless you can find somebody that's going to pretty much do 100% deferred. We had the advantage of a profitable small business platform that we could then roll that to the first deal. My usual structure was between 2.5 and 3.5 EBITDA, 40% on day one. Some of that funded through invoice finance, but a lot of it coming from the wider group. The rest of it paid over 2 to 3 years, depending on that individual's particular circumstances. But that was the typical deal structure. So finding 40% of the acquisition out of existing cash reserves was okay to do for us. But I agree, if you're coming into the sector with no existing platform, it is harder in a service business.
So getting the first deal over the line is important because then you can use the profits of that deal to do deal number two. Yeah. Okay, we've got a question. Who's got the mic? Yes.
Hi, David. Just like you to expand a bit on your management team. Sort of when you employed them, what order you employed them in. If you had your time again, would you do it in the same order? And particularly was interested in, you said your general manager, chief exec came from a different background.
Yeah.
Why was that? Did that happen or was that deliberate?
I've always thought in the care sector it's very insular, that you start off as a carer, then you become a care coordinator doing the rosters, then you become a branch manager, and everybody comes up through care. And one of the things that was missing was a real professionalisation, and I thought people in things like hospitality would really do well in the sector. I hadn't thought about the gym management, but when I met this guy, he blew me away. And he came with large multi-site experience of managing diverse teams in different locations around the country, good systems, good approaches to data analytics and measuring performance across different dimensions. He was really, really good. He was sort of the last of my major hires, and then the hires underneath him, he brought good people that he'd worked with in the past himself. The first one was finance, moving from small business bookkeeping and dealing with an external accountant to suddenly having to do the due diligence side of the acquisitions, dealing with banks, dealing with lenders, just professionalising the payroll and finance functions inside the business. That was my first investment in an external. HR director came about the same time as the chief exec, maybe a few weeks earlier. The ops director, because it does require a certain amount of sector experience, was an internal promotion. We could never afford those roles. They were all paid more than I was paying myself for most of that time. It was a case of, if we're going to go from here to here, what does here look like? Whatever way I can bring those people in with promises and, we're really good people and the business is going to grow with you and you're going to make a big difference, and selling them on the vision, that was worth the time and the money to do that, because they did take us to that next level. So, and again, just hire people that are good at things that you're shit at.
Thank you, David. I wanted to dial into those hiring criteria, conscious or unconscious, maybe make them a bit more conscious. What were the common criteria, what were the common denominators of all those people that really were able to pull with you? Was there something you were specifically looking for in them, apart from, of course, the experience in their field?
So there's the baseline of, are they good at their technical specification? Are they qualified? I interviewed about 8, 9 potential candidates for the chief exec role, and I couldn't tell you what stood out against Peter. In fact, I had my then ops director and Lisa, my finance director, sit in with me on those interviews, because although they would be working for him, they were going to have a bit of a veto on people they couldn't work with. In all cases across the various senior management team, it was that fast thinking and flexibility. I needed to feel that they understood that they weren't being hired for a steady state job, that I couldn't define what their job would look like in 6 months or 12 months' time. What they had to be prepared to do was whatever was needed, because they knew they were coming into a buy and build. And the buy and build would be chaotic and messy and run short of cash and have HR problems and staff mutiny, or clients getting, councils getting sniffy around legal contracts. They knew that they were coming into that environment. It wasn't a steady state job. And I think when they convinced me of that, that was probably the number one deciding criteria.
David, thank you very much. Let's give David some applause. That was amazing. Thank you very much.